Hello and greetings. If you're watching this, you have an interest in recovery and you have an interest in integral recovery. And what I'll try to do here is summarize very briefly what we mean when we say, or what I mean when I say integral recovery. First of all, my name is John Dupuy, and I've been working in the field of treatment and working with addicts and their families for many years now, probably over 20 years. And I helped start a couple of programs, wilderness programs dealing with addiction, both for adolescents and adults. And in this process, I became dissatisfied with what was passing for treatment at the time. There were some really good things there, but it just didn't seem enough. And it didn't seem that the numbers were good enough. I think the traditional treatment, the recovery rates were something like, depending who you read, 10, 20, 30%, which is really not good enough. If there were brain surgery that only worked 30% of the time, people probably wouldn't even use it. So we've really been struggling with this, and it's not only a personal issue of tragedy for the individual who has the disease of addiction, it's also a tragedy for the family, and it's also a tragedy for the country and the culture and the whole world. I call addiction the fifth horseman of the apocalypse. It's just extraordinarily destructive in our political systems, in our educational systems, in our cultural systems, in our family lives, and the lives of individuals. So it became important for me. And how I began this integral recovery journey, I was cruising the internet. I'd seen an article or an advertisement in a magazine, Utne Reader, and it was advertising an integral site. I think it was called integralnaked.org. And Ken Wilber was on there, whom I'd read earlier in graduate school, and other notables. And I said, okay, check it out. So I went there and I read a 40-page PDF by Ken Wilber that said, what is the integral map? What is the aqua map? And basically what Ken was putting forward was a way of looking at reality that included all the essential parts of reality that have to be taken into account if we're going to have something that actually works and functions and includes everything necessary. And I read this and I had this moment of deep inspiration where I just saw this whole thing fall into place, and how this was basically addressing and answering all the issues I had been struggling and pushing towards in the field of recovery and treatment of addiction. And it was probably one of the greatest moments of kind of intellectual, if not spiritual, illumination in my life. And I got very excited. And I got on the phone and I started calling the Integral Institute in Boulder, Colorado, and sending out emails. And who's applying this map, this aqua map by Ken Wilber, to the field of addiction treatment? And the answer shortly came back. Finally, after about 6 weeks, 2 months, it's like, nobody. And at that moment, I went, wow. I guess I'm going to have to step up and do this because this is too important not to do. So at that point, I began reading all of Ken's work and studying, and just amazed at the depth of inclusive wisdom that was included in this map. So I began to apply that. And my first steps were to write a few paragraphs, and then I began to write papers which were published. And you can see these papers on the website if you're seeing this through the Integral Recovery website. If you're not, go to integralrecovery.com. You'll find the papers there. And there's a book that I've written, which hopefully by the time you see this, it will already be published by SUNY Press, coming out soon, which is called Integral Recovery. And it lays out the whole story and the whole vision. So we have this one part of the integral recovery, which is the map or the operating system or the computer program that you can put all this disparate data into, and it comes out in a coherent whole, so we can see what to look at, what needs to be addressed. And if we leave certain things out, it's just not going to work, which accounts for just the massive amount of relapse that happens in the treatment of addiction. So, and the next part, and these two parts hold together, bring this whole thing into coherence, is integral recovery practice. And one of the things that I got from Ken Wilber, and earlier than that from Michael Murphy and George Leonard, was the idea of an integral transformative practice, or an integral life practice, or as I call it in my work, integral recovery practice. So it's not enough to go to a treatment center for 28 days, 2 months, 90 days, a half a year, and move out into the world and carry on, go back to your life and your your regular way of doing things. There needs to be more done. And you can go to AA meetings and they're great, but there's certain things, or any kind of 12-step meeting for that matter, that aren't being addressed. And that's the physical health, that's the emotional health, that's the spiritual health, and that's the cognitive health. Because if any of these essential capacities or intelligences are neglected or not dealt with, they will lead to imbalance, dysfunction, stress, and ultimately relapse, which in the case of addiction can often end in death. So these are very important essential parts. You have to include the body. So we're talking about rigorous physical exercise, to include strength training, to include yoga, to include cardio and nutrition, to make the body strong and solid, to be able to cope with stress and go throughout life and as a strong vehicle of whatever it is we're trying to bring forward. There's the cognitive line. We have to grow in our capacity to understand the world, understand other people's perspective, understand and put together the massive amounts of transformational information and beautiful poetry and art and all the things that are coming online and we have access to now. It's very important. There's the emotional line, where we have to deal with our trauma from the past, PTSD, old conditionings, old stories about ourselves that perhaps aren't functional anymore. And we have to deal with the stuff that comes up from moment to moment. As the saying goes, stuff happens, okay? So the emotional capacity to allow whatever's going on in the moment to be there without freaking out or going to grab a bottle of whiskey or a needle or a joint or whatever it is, just to be there, and finding out that emotions and states that arise, emotional states, are not our enemies, but they're our friends, and they actually have great energy for health and transformation. That's the other line. And the last, well, actually second to the last, is the spiritual line. It has long been recognized in AA, in addiction treatment, that spirituality is an essential part of the recovery process. And I've talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of people over the years who have successfully recovered. And in the AA family, those who have really made it, a stable recovery over a year's time, I said, what is the most important thing? What was that which was most essential? And almost invariably, I hear spirituality. So we work the spiritual line not as an exercise in making up what you think God should be or your higher power should be, not an exercise of buying a whole set of dogmatic principles from some religious tradition, but an actual ongoing inner work that deepens and deepens and deepens you through your own inner archaeology, so that you really begin to be connected to your own spiritual essence. And last of all is ethics. And why do I include ethics? Because in the disease of addiction, no matter what level of moral development you start out at, as the disease begins to control your life and you begin to spiral down, if you will, from your previous level into very low levels of sociopathic behavior and manipulation. People become objects to be manipulated to secure the supply of drugs. And if any of you have been an addict or have known an addict, it's a tragedy, because you're formerly good enough, loving brother, sister, husband, wife, whoever, becomes an angry, self-centered, lying, stealing, manipulative disaster. So ethics are very important, and as we begin to do our recovery practices and embark on the lifelong journey of integral recovery, we have to ask ourselves continually, why are we doing this? Who are we serving here? Who are we putting first? What really matters in our life? So I hope this is inspiring enough to get you to read the papers and the books and listen to the other videos where I really break it down. And if you're an addict, or if you're a family member of an addict and you're going through the crisis and the tragedy of having a loved one or dying yourself in this disease, please contact us and know that our heart is with you. And thank you, and God bless.
When I dream you in the nighttime, when I feel you in the sunshine, when you spin me in the moonlight, when you tell me that it's all right, when you touch me in my pain, when you wash me in the rain, when you hold